Today's program is going to kick off with two videos. The first video is an aspirational video with some of our community leaders, and this was used at last year's summit, if you remember that, and also in some subsequent programming since then, so hopefully it'll be familiar to you all. The second video will be narrated by Michael, and that's going to focus on implementation of initiatives and ideas that we've come up with for our region. Some of those are in place, some are under consideration. It is meant to be futuristic and follows our theme for today, which is Imagine, Build a 22nd Century OneNKY. After the videos, Michael will be speaking with our chair of the OneNKY Alliance, Bob Heil, along with our CEO of the OneNKY Alliance, Kim Bynum, and then we'll cover some future topics in today's program. So for now, please pay your full attention to the video and enjoy. We appreciate your engagement on behalf of our community speech.
In 2019, the OneNKY Alliance convened the OneNKY Summit Series. The Summit Series included meetings, conversations, and forums to discuss the future of our region. What are we anxious about? What is our new ambition? What does the future hold for this great region? How do we speak with one voice to the region, Frankfurt, Washington, and anyone interested in expanding their business or taking residence here? Business leaders, public officials, and civic advocates were engaged to discuss these concerns and what success looks like for the OneNKY Metro. These leaders tackled the question of what would our future be and how would we claim it? How could we leverage the great companies that have been built here, the ambition of local entrepreneurs, and the power of our leading institutions?
A new path was created based on the need for economic activity, job growth, educational attainment, and population health. A new platform was developed to focus on these efforts and to stake our claim as the most powerful metropolitan economy in the Commonwealth. Bold, measurable goals were set to define the mission of the work, and we faced the challenge with grit and determination. Here we are in 2030, and the journey of the past decade has included transformational project announcements, notable entrepreneurial achievements, and the greatest expansion of the OneNKY Metro economy in its history. A decade later, the OneNKY Metro has not only achieved the job, investment, and income goals it set, but has also earned distinction as a thriving area with boundless ambition and economic potential.
In the past decade, we have created over 40,000 net new jobs and have secured over $4 billion in capital investment. This has resulted in a 20% increase in the personal per capita income of all Northern Kentuckians. In addition, the data now substantiates that we're well on our way to achieving our goal of being one of the healthiest communities in America, and we rank #1 in the Commonwealth for educational attainment. And for the first time in history, Northern Kentucky is viewed by Frankfurt as a place to invest the Commonwealth's money for the greatest return on investment, which benefits all Kentuckians. The OneNKY Metro has emerged as a beacon of economic competitiveness and population growth. As this decade ends, the community is surging beyond its goals and is considered a national model for how ambition and regional collaboration drives community success. We look back and we take pride that our efforts in the past decade have enabled our communities to prosper and our lives to change for the better. But our work is just beginning as we continue to build our OneNKY of the 22nd century. The numbers speak to our success, but what we are most proud of is the social mobility opportunities that now exist for all Northern Kentuckians. OneNKY is now more than a brand, more than a building, more than an initiative. OneNKY is our culture. OneNKY is who we are.
Aspire through a unified, healthy, and educated community to reach our goals. How do we get there? Let's watch our next video as we take imagination and implementation going forward. Imagine yourself, which is tough for me to do, 10 years from now as you watch the video.
And good afternoon. OneNKY. My name is Michael Monks. I'm the Chief Content Officer at OneNKY, and I'm so excited to be your moderator for this conversation about the future of our region today. And so you've heard that vision and the aspirations that may lie ahead over the next decade. And the question is, how exactly do we get there? And so deliberate implementation is key to those strategies. And we wanted to present here today one scenario that caught the interest of OneNKY, given the many possibilities that are now underway. So let's imagine, and then build our 22nd century and the impact of 3 northern Kentucky counties in Boone, Campbell, and Kenton increasing dramatically as the NKY Metro emerges, supported by a 500,000 population, a new structure allowing northern Kentucky to take on larger challenges, including the demand for regional infrastructure, education, and energy policies. This transition occurred in the early 2030s due to housing, infrastructure requirements, and other socioeconomic needs, coupled with the benefit of proven ongoing operational efficiencies from our government entities. The work began 10 years earlier as elected officials, growth organizations, community and business leaders began creating the conditions for a shared governance model. Shared governance in the region focuses on simplification of business tax structures, providing digital infrastructure that can support business infrastructure, and we make it easy to do business in northern Kentucky. A stronger presence with our lawmakers through OneNKY Frankfurt, and increased lobbying presence, serving as the seed for greater cooperation through regional needs and building consensus to support what is needed to make the NKY Metro structure a reality. So as a result of NKY's increased influence and expanded impact on the Commonwealth and greater Cincinnati region, OneNKY leads the Commonwealth and region as a connector and accelerator for growth and innovation as the community shoots for the moon as an innovation hub across multiple sectors, inclusive of life sciences and e-commerce. A public-private partnership has been effective in partnering with employers across the region to help develop a skills-based inventory. Job-ready credentials are providing local employers with skills in life science, advanced manufacturing, infotech, supply chain management, with clear results, ensuring equity in these areas through strong DEI efforts. The community benefits from a thriving K through 20 labor market and workforce development system. So OneNKY is known as an adapter of leading policy and education model for our school-age population. It produces and attracts outstanding talent as NKY becomes ground zero for legitimate life science and biotech industrial research activity. Local investments with Northern Kentucky University, Thomas More University, Gateway Community and Technical College, and industry partnerships produce professionals to support the facets of supply chain management at CVG, which continues to generate incredible advances on the national and international fronts. NKY stakes its claim as the leader on the e-commerce front, as many thriving businesses emerge because of these advances. Talent and opportunity navigate its way to the community as a result. OneNKY is the healthiest among the healthiest communities in the country. And it started with the implementation of a smoke-free ordinance in Dayton in September of 2022, which rippled with responses throughout the remaining 35 cities across the region. Healthy lifestyles continued with a prevention focus on cancer, diabetes, hypertension, mental health. Housing solutions and transportation access impact positive health outcomes on all citizens of Northern Kentucky who are met with necessary resources. The community's investments in parks and trails throughout the area serves as another big driver of improved community health outcomes. The completed Riverfront Commons serves as the front door to the region and showcases a welcoming, vibrant, OneNKY. So it's hard to think back all those years ago to the 2020s, isn't it? But thank you for joining me on that journey as we envision what this community can be.
And there you go. How about those videos? Very nice results from a lot of our local organizations. And Karen, forgive me, I forgot to do something at the beginning that you asked me to do, which was to thank some of the folks who are here. Some of the elected officials that are represented here today include Boone County Judge Executive Gary Moore, Senator Mitch McConnell's office has Megan Van-Kemper here, and State Representatives Kim Banton, Adam Koenig. We also have OneNKY board members in the audience today: Bill Butler of Corporex, Sylvia Buxton of Perfetti Van Mel, Kevin Canifex of Fidelity, Joseph Chillo of Thomas More University, David Dries of Dries Homes, Greg Fisher of Fisher Homes, Andy Hawking of Truist, Bob Heil, of course, from KLH Engineers, and you also heard earlier from Jim Ubel from Central Bank. So thanks to all of you for being here, in addition to our guests that were just named. I'm Michael Monks, Chief Content Officer at LinkNKY. First, let's thank Jim Ubel of Central Bank for his sponsorship, along with St. Elizabeth, Duke Energy, PNC, and Von Lehman. Really appreciate Jim's introduction and our sponsors today. So you just watched a couple of videos there, and those are designed to set the tone for this conversation that we are going to have today as we imagine and build our 22nd century OneNKY. Now, there are complex conversations, as we can all imagine, involved with this, and then, of course, there are necessary actions that must follow these conversations. So we're going to start with one of those conversations. So let's welcome up to the stage. I guess you're going to come over there. You're going to come here. I'm going to step out of the way then. Let's welcome Bob Heil. He is the chairman of OneNKY and from KLH Engineers, and then later you'll hear from Karen Finan, OneNKY CEO. There you go, Bob.
Thank you. So, Michael, thank you for the introduction and the inspirational videos. We started the OneNKY Summit in 2019. We held the very first one. And now we call it the OneNKY Summit Series because we've held one every year since. And we're going to continue to engage the community in this way. So look forward to that. This summit is your opportunity to get updates on the key initiatives that the OneNKY Alliance has undertaken. It's also your opportunity to discuss amongst ourselves the status of our community. And it's also, most importantly, your opportunity to provide your voice to the work that's going to be done in the future on behalf of this community. So I'm going to apologize now to my fellow board members and to anybody in the room who has seen me introduce this concept of creative tension. But I promise you today there will be an important twist. So I'm going to use this rubber band as a prop. This rubber band represents, in this case, our community. At the bottom is our current reality. At the top is our future. This is our future whether or not we have purposeful engagement in shaping it or not. It's going to happen to us. Creative tension is created when we do two things. First, all of us would like to think that we're better than we really are. Let's face it, it's a human thing, right? We all look at ourselves through rose-colored glasses. And oftentimes, as a community, we do the same thing. What's important in creating the creative tension that we need to drive our region forward is we have got to have a brutally honest assessment of our current reality. That oftentimes will bring us down. Tension is created from what we think we are to who we really are at this moment. The other thing that creates tension, well, first of all, we know what this is. We have the data to substantiate that brutally honest assessment of our current reality. We have health data that St. Elizabeth collects. We have data on our education system that is provided to us from the state and other resources. We have data that Janet Hara, who's here with us today, provides us from CIAD. We have the data that Triad will soon provide us as they embark on a data-driven initiative, right? We have data about poverty and homelessness, social mobility. We have work to do in each case. That is our current reality. Everyone in this room is visionary, I know that. We all have our own vision about what this region can be, and that creates tension, aspirational as it is. Today, here's the wrinkle. Today, we have the benefit of having with us Dr. Chris Rice from Refuturing. He is a futurist, and he will remind you that he does not predict the future. What he does is informs us as to the trends that come out of the data that he analyzes. We have our brutally honest assessment of our current reality. We have our vision. Today, we're going to be blessed to have more data that's going to stretch us even further. These trends are going to happen whether we like it or not. These trends are generated by forces outside of our control. We have the ability to choose. Are these going to be forces that we should be afraid of? Are they going to be threats, or are they going to be opportunities? How we answer that question is going to inform how we make this statement 10, 20, 30 years from now. Are we going to say, look at what those forces did to us, or are we going to say, look at what those forces did for us? That's the question at hand. Today, we hope to create a roadmap with your input to inform the work that we're going to do in the future. And I say we, the OneNKY Alliance, and every one of your organizations and every one of you individually. This is important work that we're doing, not just for informing what we are going to do collectively, but for also defining the roadmap for those future generation of leaders who we are going to pass the baton to in the future. Thank you.
So I'll bring us back to implementation. And Bob, I think it's important to note that we must have engaged community and business leaders. We must have our growth organizations strategically aligned. And we must have elected officials who understand the movement needed to advance Northern Kentucky to the next level. But it's important for our community members to be part of this process. And as you'll hear our keynote say today, it's hard to imagine yourself in a future that you're not part of. There are many ways to engage, many community events that are meant as updates, as a way for you to use your voice. As part of the OneNKY Alliance, which we began in 2019, there were specific goals that were set. Goals that ranged from marketing and branding, development, workforce housing, a lot of things related to socioeconomic needs. We looked at solutions ranging from aligning our strategies, amplifying our resources, using data and technology to identify the gaps, all very, very important things. And there are a number of grassroots and strategic efforts underway throughout this community, not just in this room, but throughout this community. Already the smoke-free ordinance has been mentioned, but I'll mention it again. That was a significant move in Dayton, Kentucky, through Mayor Ben Baker, the Dayton City Council, and City Administrator Jay Fawcett to persevere through the smoke-free ordinance, one of many other changes that are happening in our community. So we look forward to those efforts, and we look forward to supporting those efforts as well. From here, in the next video, you will see the progress that has been underway related to the goals that we have flashed up here on the board. And you will hear from our growth organizations who have integrated the future of Northern Kentucky into their everyday work. This is extremely important. It sets the tone for the rest of our program, as you will hear our keynote take us back into the future. But we also think it's extremely important that you understand what's been happening right now and where our progress is to date. So with that, we'll start the other video. The OneNKY Alliance has convened business and community leaders around transformative initiatives since 2019 through the OneNKY Summit. Through partnership, we have announced, launched, and supported a variety of tangible efforts that move this community forward. One of the most recent ones is related to a healthy OneNKY and the Breathe Easy smoke-free ordinance in Dayton, Kentucky. This is a major congrats and call out to Mayor Ben Baker, Dayton City Council members, City Administrator Jay Fawcett for their efforts in passing this smoke-free ordinance. This is a significant win for Northern Kentucky as we pursue world-class standards in health for all community members. Your growth organizations are working as one on behalf of our community because of the summit in our regularly scheduled meetings to cross-market and align strategies. What you'll hear today are just a few examples of things that are being completed by our growth organizations. One of the first outcomes from the OneNKY Summit came in the form of a branding goal to provide Northern Kentucky with a unified voice for growth within the Cincinnati MSA and Frankfort. Much work has been done around this, and you will hear soon from Julie Kirkpatrick about a brand destination project soon to be underway. But consider a few things that have happened since our first summit in 2019. There is physical presence now through the OneNKY Frankfort facility thanks to member company St. Elizabeth and sponsors. This OneNKY shared service facility is within walking distance to Frankfort, our capital, and provides our community brand and presence. We are also planning a OneNKY headquarters where all our growth organizations will live under one roof, aligning strategies and driving our community forward. Finally, OneNKY is the unapologetic multimedia platform that covers Boone, Kenton, and Campbell County. We're very excited that this group has been active now for close to a year, and we look forward to their growth.
This is an exciting time in Northern Kentucky. So many amazing stories have been written about this place that we call home. But now we have a big challenge to go through a branding exercise that for the first time will define what it means to be part of Northern Kentucky. What are the stories and the pillars and the guidelines that we need to take out into the marketplace to showcase this place that we love to live, work, play, learn, and give back? OneNKY, along with our regional partners in 2023, is going to kick off this branding exercise. Our goal at the end is to have that story to tell, not just to the region, but to the world.
I'm Jean Schroer, CEO of the Catalytic Fund. I'm here to report on one of the OneNKY priority initiatives, which is to develop shovel-ready sites complete with funding to attract office and industrial businesses to Northern Kentucky, along with supporting residential, retail, hospitality, and entertainment development that enhances the quality of life so we can attract talent. When the Catalytic Fund was formed in 2008, the goal was to launch with a $10 million fund, which we did in 2013, with the long-term goal of maintaining a $20 million fund. As part of that goal, we wanted there to be a $2 million flexible capital pool that could support riskier investments such as property acquisitions and pre-development loans. I'm very happy to report to the community that we've exceeded the $20 million long-term goal and have actually accumulated a $21.1 million fund. And of that, $3.1 million consists of flexible capital pool grant dollars, which exceeds our original $2 million goal.
Hello, my name is Will Weber, and I'm the president and CEO of South Bank Partners. Since 1997, South Bank Partners was created for a vibrant riverfront in our Northern Kentucky communities. We embrace working with the river cities for the past 25 years. And through our latest strategic plan, Imagination 2020, we have been able to do just that, revitalizing the river cities. And we're excited to announce our new strategic plan, Innovate 2028, where we will transform urban communities. And it's very exciting. We have quite a few projects in the works, but there are important gaps that we need to fill as we continue to see riverfront commons finalize and actualize in our community. And as we look at the city of Ludlow connecting to the city of Covington through River Road and Swain Court, and making those connections so our friends in Ludlow isn't left on an island, but continues to show exactly what that vital connection is for riverfront commons connecting all of our cities. And even more so, where's that next gap? Where's the next gap as we look at creating these successful projects for Riverfront Commons in the core of our river cities. But what about the tail ends where the river starts to bend? Where are we making those connections? And Mary Ingalls Highway in the city of Fort Thomas and Silver Grove will be that next portion of our connections. We envision the future of Route 8, Mary Ingalls Highway, as we connect it further east into these strong bookends on either end of Riverfront Commons.
Hi, I'm Nancy Grayson. I'm CEO and President of Horizon Community Funds of Northern Kentucky. As we all know, the pandemic's taken a huge toll on our community, and as we emerge into whatever version of the next stage is, things that we're addressing right now at Horizon Community Funds really revolve a lot around education, and I know this was a priority coming out of the OneNKY Summit last year. We did an educator survey in fall of 2021, and we learned that in the K-5 space for our local public and private schools, there was a huge need for family engagement support and also for out-of-school time learning, meaning after school or summertime learning, supports for youth to be able to recover from the pandemic slide that they might have had.
Hi, I'm Gina Douthit, Deputy General Manager for the Transit Authority of Northern Kentucky. TANK provides service in Boone, Campbell, and Kenton counties in Northern Kentucky. We all know that transportation is a key need in Northern Kentucky in order for our residents to access employment, healthcare, and education opportunities. An outcome of the 2019 TANK planning process put resources into the fixed route bus network, providing frequent service in key corridors, as well as focused service to the airport and other employment centers. We've started a process to focus on a new type of transit service, which might better meet the needs of the community. We will be meeting with stakeholders to determine transportation gaps and needs. Once we know what we need, we can use data, research, and best practices nationally to determine how to best meet the needs locally. Our goal is true mobility for all of our residents in Northern Kentucky, and we're taking action to achieve that goal.
By 2030, do you want to be 500,000 people in this community? If you're 500,000 people, how big do you want that workforce to be? I hope it's not 180,000 because that's a terrible outcome. How big do you want that be, and what types of jobs and payroll investment do you want be comprised of that? These questions have led us to start a channel of work that we call data-informed community, and it's exactly what you think it is. It's creating the type of data that we need as a community to ask questions, come together in forums like this, and then make decisions so that we know for sure we have the right goals as a community and we're doing the right thing to accomplish those. On this channel of work, we have a number of partners that we work with. Everything that we do, we leverage through partners. We're 12 people growing to 15 this year. So, 15 mighty people aren't going to change this community itself, but working through our partners like CAD and OneNKY and Catalytic Fund, Boone County Libraries, Kenton County Libraries, the WIB, the AD, and so many others, we've put this channel of work together.
At the Northern Kentucky Chamber, we're working to help create a world-class workforce, build a more diverse business community, and align the region on advocacy efforts. We're currently advocating on topics such as regional transportation and infrastructure, resources for quality education, solutions for affordable housing, and policies that will make our economy grow, all things we've discussed during previous OneNKY summits. In order for us to successfully do this on behalf of Northern Kentucky, we need to ensure that we are all in alignment as a region, all singing from the same songbook, to enable us to collectively leverage the second largest population base in the state, the Northern Kentucky metro area, with 80,000 more registered voters than Lexington Fayette. All of our programs, communications, and events at the Northern Kentucky Chamber, from our Women's Initiative and DE&I efforts, to our leadership and young professional programs, and even our business journal and social media efforts, they're all designed to attract and retain world-class talent, promote business growth, and strengthen our advocacy efforts. Aligned communication is essential for all of these things to be successful, especially on the advocacy front, if we are to generate the results that will have a lasting impact on the Northern Kentucky metro region.
And now, we're going to do a little time travel. We're going to go forward. So I want you to, again, as you were asked before, to think about 10 years from now. That puts us at about 2032. And imagine who we can be. in 2032. Sarah Giordano, excuse me, Sarah, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, Giolanda, like you're ordering a pizza.
Is that a pizza?
It's like very close, very close.
I took 4 semesters of Italian at NKU, but I got C's. All right, Sarah Giolando is Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer from St. Elizabeth, and she will take us to liftoff to 10 years from now and introduce our keynote for today. And also there are introductions for our strategic table work provided by Chris Rice with a few tables reporting out and a summary at the end of the session. So I will hand it over now. These are yours. Sarah, thank you, everyone.
Hi, welcome, good afternoon. St. Elizabeth is certainly pleased to sponsor the OneNKY Summit Series, and we've been involved since its beginning in 2019. It is so good to see many of our community, business, elected officials really well engaged here as part of the OneNKY Summit. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote today as a feature of the 2022 OneNKY Summit. Christopher Rice, PhD, is the founder and managing partner of Refuturing, where he leads foresight, strategy, and research activities. As a futurist, Christopher has worked with leaders in business, community, and government for over 25 years to rethink unspoken assumptions, reframe problems and challenges, reimagine possible futures, and develop actionable strategies to achieve them. Christopher writes and speaks on a wide variety of topics at the intersections of strategic foresight, sustainable community development, education, culture, and technology. He will also, if given the opportunity, talk your ear off about bourbon and the craft of songwriting. A Kentuckian born and raised, Christopher currently resides in the weirdly futuristic city of Austin, Texas. Wouldn't we like to have their growth rates? And what we are most excited about today is the innovative thought and content Chris brings to us through his keynote. Most people, when they think about the future, envision a world that is much like today, perhaps with some slight changes in technology and maybe a little bit of fashion. At Refuturing, they call these hand-me-down futures. The truth is, the futures are always multiple, simultaneous, and unevenly distributed. Focusing on technology alone leads to many leaders being blindsided by the sometimes subtle and sometimes dramatic changes that are shaping our world. So how should we think about futures in order to best prepare ourselves, our institutions, and our communities for the possibilities ahead? In this talk, futurist Dr. Christopher Rice will take you through the key drivers, the trends and signals, including demographic, housing, food, technology, economics, health, environment and climate, communications, and even more, that will be shaping our world through 2037, if you can imagine that. It's going to help you look at a plausible, possible, and even probable future through the lens of strategic foresight, and provide strategic takeaways for thinking through the implications of governance, education, health, economic development, community development, and even more. Without further ado, Dr. Chris Rice.
It is my extreme pleasure to be here today at the OneNKY Alliance Summit Series. As the very kind introduction mentioned, I am a Kentuckian, born and raised, and it's always my extreme pleasure to come home and talk to home folks and help them think through the abundant futures potential of the great state of Kentucky. So thank you for bringing me here today. We're going to take a little trip through that, beginning in your imagination. And so what I'd like you to do now is to just close your eyes and take a moment to think about the future. Let's think about the year 2037, a very short 15 years from now. What does that future look like? What are people doing? What are they eating? Can you picture maybe where they go to work, what they're wearing when they go to work? Hold that in your head. Okay, let's come back to now, right? I'm willing to bet that if I asked each of you about your vision of the future, I would have gotten probably 100 different responses as to what that future looks like. And that's a good thing, right? Because the futures are always multiple, right? There is no one future out there ahead. In fact, there are multiple futures out there happening to multiple communities all at the same time. So I'm not here to predict the future for you. That's not what futurists do. As Niels Bohr tells us, prediction is difficult, especially about the future. So we're not here to talk about a prediction. What we are here to talk about today is thinking about what we can do today based on the trends and information that we have at hand about the futures, to think about that and to think about the action that we're going to take. So as we walk through today's presentation, you have at your tables a worksheet that looks like this. This is featuring Trend Landscape Canvas. And you'll see here that there are sections for social, technological, economic, environmental, and political trends. And we've also included space to begin thinking about some areas that are very important for OneNKY and the broader community in the areas of health, education. We want to think about that demographics. And so as we go through today's presentation, I'd like to encourage you to pick up a pen, take a pencil, note some of the things that you hear today that might capture attention, some things that you think you could put your shoulder to the wheel to work on, and we'll pull that into our table exercises as we get going. So let's start today by talking about some social trends. First of all, let's just say the United States is quickly becoming a gray nation. If you're like me, when you went to school, you learned all about the demographic pyramid, right? That at the top were a very small number of older people, at the bottom were a very large number of young people. And what is happening is that's becoming more of a demographic rectangle, right? Where there's this sort of even distribution of the age groups. And sometime, right around 10 years from now, those demographic lines cross, where the first time in our history we will have just as many Americans over the age of 65 as we have under the age of 18. Right? This isn't, of course, evenly distributed. We know that some areas of the country are becoming grayer faster than others. For example, in the United States, rural areas of the United States are quickly becoming older in terms of median age faster than other areas, while other areas, specifically urban areas, which we'll get into in a moment, are getting younger. Now, this doesn't mean that we're all living to the age of 120 just because we are becoming a grayer nation. We know that over time, the U.S. has experienced a diminishing life expectancy. Of course, this altered dramatically beginning in 2020. For reasons we don't really need to talk about yet. But this was happening long before 2020 hit us, right? So compared to most of the Western industrialized world, the United States is enjoying a lower life expectancy for both men and women. Now, contributing to that, if we think about how you construct the median age, right, we're also having fewer children. Right? One of the things that began right around 2007, 2008 with that economic crash, we also had a demographic hit. People just stopped having as many children. And then following 2020, we know that continued at an accelerated pace, such that we were looking at the end of 2020 at what we would call missing births, right around the time of December, about 40,000 missing births, and that's only increased. You'll hear some talk about a little blip up at the end of 2021. That's accomplished through some very clever math that we can talk about later. But make no mistake, the trend for lower childbirths is only accelerating. Now, this makes immigration even more important today than it has been in the past. We're already at the point as a nation that without net new international in-migration, we would be below replacement rate in terms of fertility rates, and that's only going to become more exacerbated in the future. This becomes important if you want to maintain a workforce and also an entitlement system that's based on Social Security taxes, FICA taxes, from laboring population. So when we talk about getting older, right, these sorts of things become more important. And of course, COVID is an impactor on our demographic situation. What we know now is that right around 20% of all COVID infections become long COVID, where these symptoms persist in different and unusual ways over time. We know that this is a case where the more you get infected, the more likely you are to come down with some form of long COVID. This is whether you're vaccinated or not, right? What does this do to us? Well, we know that if you are in a population that is more prone to having diabetes type 2, we know that this increases the probability of getting diabetes type 2 by somewhere between 28 and 42% over the course of the next year or two following your COVID infection. Diabetes type 1 is also beginning to pop up in our data for children who have become infected or exposed during the school year. We also know that you're 52% more likely to have a stroke, 72% more likely to suffer heart failure. So as we were talking at dinner last night, one of the things I always tell people to keep an ear out for is if you start hearing the phrase, died unexpectedly of a heart attack, maybe not as unexpected as we'd like to think. And then of course brain fog, where we know your executive function sort of slowly fades over time, leading to your inability to handle a lot of day-to-day tasks or even tasks in the workforce. So COVID is also an impactor on our effective population. And one of the things we're going to just have to get used to over time is that we're going to be growing older in a world in which population decline is a going concern. Now, if you're like me, you always grew up with, I call Eric, right, the population bomb. Anybody remember that? Right? We were all going to be overwhelmed. And when actually we're looking at numbers to the end of the 21st century in which, say, China has approximately half the population that it does today. So the world's population will be much smaller over the coming decades. How we live together change. So in the U.S., we're just about to the point where single households are beginning to overtake married households as a proportion of the U.S., and the big bulk of those are never married, not divorced or widowed. This is leading to an increase in what we call multi-generational housing, right, where you have people living together, not as we would think of the traditional nuclear family, right, the Beaver, but much more something like a modern-day Waltons, where you have children living at home longer with their parents, coming back after college, multiple stops, older parents living with their working children, parents or grandchildren and grandparents living together. This is becoming especially more prevalent among African American and Latino populations in the United States, but also white non-Hispanic Americans as well. In fact, 20%, 1 out of 5 Americans today already lives multi-generationally. Already lives multi-generationally. What this means is that we begin to see something, in that upper right-hand corner where you have multi-generational, non-blood related groups beginning to find living arrangements together. Right? How does that impact our housing? Right? How does that impact how we think about zoning? Right? We know that at the beginning of the early part of the 20th century, communities began to really roll back the laws that allowed for boarding houses. And now, to meet the demands of these changing housing patterns, you see communities that are beginning to allow for boarding houses and different types of arrangements to meet this growing pressure on our communities for housing. The United States continues to urbanize, right? We are not going back, or a lot of people thought, well, with COVID, people will leave the cities and flee to the country, and that'll be our new normal. They also said this after 9/11. It's one of those things that you can kind of listen to as a trope that comes back. Far from it. We are continuing, like the rest of the world, to urbanize and urbanize quickly. And this has put pressure on city officials and economic development officials to think about things in terms of 15-minute cities. Cities that have been successful in drawing people into their urban development efforts have been focusing on developing cities that are zoned and planned to the effect where you can easily get from your home to into a place of worship, a sporting event, or business offices, shopping, all within a 15-minute radius. And not just by car. Cars won't get you there. You'll hear a lot about micro-mobility over the next decade. And in fact, one of the things that you'll see in a bit is one of our early drivers of that is e-bikes. This is actually the Volcon Brat. Has a 70-mile range, retails for about $2,800. This is on the upper end of the e-bike range. A lot of times you can get a good one for $500–600. So it'll do very nicely. But these e-bikes are going to be a way to get around. If any of you have been watching that new Amazon Prime show, The Peripheral, one of the things you notice is that our main character is getting around a lot through exactly one of these. Public transportation begins to become more important, not only to get people around to meet the needs of this 15-minute city plan, but also because it's a good public health move. We know that just taking one petroleum-fueled bus and replacing that with an electric bus is going to be the equivalent of taking 23 petroleum-fueled cars off the street. Has a massive influence. This is why you'll see a big push on electrification of the school bus fleets, especially in areas where the kids are having to take long bus rides for consolidated school districts. It makes a tremendous impact on the respiratory health of these kids. At the same time that we are doing this, we're seeing sort of a trend toward public spaces becoming more hostile for people to be there. On the left, you see a number of cities in the United States have sort of built into their public architecture things that discourage people from gathering locally. This is often done in the name of preventing homeless population from intruding onto certain urban spaces, but it also has the effect of making places less possible, less enjoyable, less pleasant for your community to go around, whether it's sort of spikes around community gardens, right, or whether this is rocks to prevent people from setting up tents or bus shelters that are limited in its seating, right? We also know that in the United States, we can keep track of about good data on the number of mass shootings that occur every year. This is a bar chart showing you the number of mass shootings in the United States prior to July 4th every year, the amount of public gun violence. Someone who lives in Texas where we have a lot of public gun violence that goes on. This is also making sort of public spaces less hospitable for our communities together, which sort of tears that social fabric. So, public spaces, important but challenged. We also know that there are some precarities in terms of thinking about our public support for higher education. And this shows our sort of ongoing public disagreement about, say, the role of government. But one thing we know for sure is that public support as a whole for public support of higher education has diminished. This is significantly greater among Republicans than it is for Democrats, for example. So how we fund higher education is an ongoing sort of civic struggle. Now what that's led to is this increase in a type of educational course we'll call micro-credentials. You might hear about stackable credentials, right? And these are credentials that are different, smaller in many ways, still by some accredited provider, that are largely workforce-ready, skills-based. And what we know is that approximately 68% of adults, when asked over the last couple of years, have said that in terms of thinking about their education as adult learners, they are much more likely to pursue some sort of workforce-ready, skills-based micro-credential as an educational path. Can institutions of higher education adapt to these needs? One thing we know is that universities are already thinking about how to adapt to lifelong learning, right? How do we think about education not just as something that happens to you from the age of 5 or 6 until you are 22 or 23, but how do you think about something that is a lifetime? You'll often hear this phrase, the 60-year curriculum, that is pulled about now by a lot of education experts. In other words, thinking about educating for the whole person over the span of their lifetime. And more than that, some universities are already thinking about how do we bring retired populations onto our campus to be a key part of our learning communities. Here you see the Mirabella complex at Arizona State University in lovely, warm Tempe. This is a dorm, essentially, a residential house, retirement housing. They have folks that live there, are in the libraries, are in the student facilities, mingling with students today, thinking about lifelong learning. So how do we begin to think about reconfiguring our public education spaces to accommodate what we know will be a grayer northern Kentucky? It's worth thinking about. All right, technological trends. So we've covered the social, now let's talk about technological. First off, what we want to talk about is AI. This is the prime technological driver over the next 20, 30 years and how that plays out. Now, it's probably not the way you think it is. A lot of times when you hear AI, you think of this evil dude on the left, right? The enemies are going to come in and save you from this evil general AI, right? This AI that thinks like a person, but maybe 20% more evil. You know, it's not. What AI generally tends to look like is much more on the right, where they found that someone was using an AI engine called GPT-3 from a company called OneNKY that was able to just generate a new Reddit post every 30 seconds that was indistinguishable from human. Do we have educators in the office, in the room today? Educators, raise your hand, be proud, right? If you're assigning low-stakes writing assignments, I will promise you that already today, your students are using this to provide the answers to your short writing assessments, right? We're going to have to get better at educating students because if an AI can respond itself to your learning prompt, we may need to adjust how it is that we're teaching and assessing our young people. I've seen this done already all the way down to middle school level, right? It is happening as we speak. AI you'll often see in the generation of images. So some of you may have seen the deep fake from the Russian military that was reported to be Zelensky urging his people to surrender, but that wasn't true. Some of you may have seen, if you're like me, big fans of the Star Wars Cinematic Universe, you've probably seen the Boba Fett episode where Mark Hamill from 1983 has magically been transported to act in a modern-day television show. Of course, time travel being impossible, it's done through AI, placing his face on the body of a modern actor. And then, of course, if you're like me, you love Anthony Bourdain. You probably saw that documentary Roadrunner. I challenge you to go back and look at that because there are some portions of that where you hear Anthony Bourdain reading a letter or reading an email that he never in his lifetime read out loud. They trained an AI on his voice and then had it read emails and letters for them on the documentary. Go back and see if you can spot it. So, we tell our children, everybody should learn to code. Well, if people can code, AI can code. So here you see OpenAI's Codex engine. You want to code a website, you don't need to go to a front-end web developer fresh out of your community college. You just tell Kodak, I want a website of this size, with these colors, these elements, in this font, and I want these tags on it, and then boom, it just spits out the code for you in real time. So if you're a computer programmer, I say this as someone who sent his son to university to be a computer programmer, he's having to already get adjusted to the idea that's present right there in GitHub. If you're in that, there's AI-assisted programming already in place. How about art? I'm sending my daughter to art school next year, right? Surely art is going to be. No, all of these images were created by an AI engine called DALL-E that you can get a subscription to and have it do. You type in a prompt, I want a picture of a frog that looks like an 18th century painting and he's wearing a top hat. Boom, it generates that picture for you, trained on a huge set of pictures across the internet. So art is going Centaur as well. How about food, right? My wife, when she decided to get out of the medical profession and wanted a second career, went to culinary, right? Surely AI won't impede on culinary, right? Wrong. So there are these Notco and other companies that are using AI to create new flavors, new recipes, new profiles, and they're engineering the food that you'll be eating in upscale restaurants very shortly, and products like Not Milk and some other things that you may have already seen on your grocery shelves. And I hate to tell you, even whiskey. Right? I know. Like, this is pretty horrifying to me. I feel like John Henry sometimes. Be careful. Read the room, man. Read the room. I'm on my bourbon. I'm a Frankfurt boy. I grew up with it. It's a religion for me. But you also have this where they can basically just simulate what it would be like if you create this flavor, this mash bill, put it in this wood, and age it in these temperature, humidity, like like the AI can do it for you. So what does it mean? Who do we need to educate? How do we need to educate it? It turns out that artists and poets and writers become just as important in the modern era as engineers, because it's a rise of a career that you will hear mentioned very soon and will become critical over the next 2 decades, what we call prompt engineers. People who are good at telling the AI what it wants in such a specific, detailed way, which requires thinking deeply about the aesthetics of the thing to be produced. So when we think about workforce-ready credentials, it may sound absurd to say that poetry is a workforce-ready credential, but if you want to train yourself to become a prompt engineer, it becomes very important. Now, delivery. Amazon is a big thing here in northern Kentucky. We often think you've probably seen this video floating around where this giant sort of blimp drifts over your neighborhood and all these little drones come buzzing out and they're just dropping packages everywhere like the elves at the beginning of that Arthur Christmas movie or whatever, right? They're all there. That is not real, by the way. That is a computer generated. But what Amazon really is patenting is this little bit, where an Amazon truck can roll up in your neighborhood, carry about 20 of these little delivery drones or so, and the guy in the truck pops all the packages in the drones fan out across the neighborhood, drop the packages, all come back, they're on to the next area. Right? Amazon's already patenting that and already testing that today. You already see these robots probably, if you've been around town, Grubhub has them, a different UK has some of these, NKU has some of these, Austin, South Congress is just littered with these robots delivering home sliced pizza all day long. You've seen these, right? So it's not such a far-fetched to think that these things are going to increase what they deliver. How about grocery work, you might say? Well, this is actually a picture on the left of a grocery distribution center where customers come and back up their car to the bay, pick up the groceries, and inside that store are a bunch of robots running over a grid, picking up the groceries that they ordered in their app, boxing that up, sending it to the front of the distribution, you back in, get your stuff, no human picked your groceries for you. This is in the United Kingdom, and there's some of these being built in the US as we speak. When I was a kid, I had truck drivers in my family, and the phrase was, if this doesn't work out, I can always drive a truck. Maybe not, right? So in Texas, we already have Waymo that's building this center. I talked to the architect who's working on this center in Dallas, and there's that route, I-10, I-20, I-45, where you have autonomous trucks from Waymo that are already running some of these routes. And they're talking about running the route from Dallas to San Diego beginning next year, right? So long haul interstate trucking. This can look pretty weird, right? Boys, we're getting up a convoy. Well, they do tend to travel in convoys. It's almost like a land train with these things. And as you can see from the picture on the right, there's just no driver in this. Today, if you look around, you might like pull up and see a truck that doesn't have a driver in it, but at least has a cab. No, we don't need that cab anymore. They're all kitted out with sensors and cameras. And who's driving it? Well, you may be familiar with this company. Texans are familiar with it. It's called OneNKY. It's a European company that's working on this. And the lovely woman that you see here in the lower left is our truck driver, more likely to say our pod operator, who's operating 12 of these autonomous trucks from a desktop setup of 2 computer monitors, a stream deck, that little thing that you see. And so the things largely drive themselves, but our pod operator is correcting them or working them through and training them in situations that are more difficult. So one pod operator, and this is not a picture generated by Dolly, by the way. This is a real picture of a current working pod operator for OneNKY. So health tech, you might say. Well, what do we know about health tech? Well, wearables, I mean, a lot of you are probably wearing one of these that's collecting your heart rate, your temperature, your respiratory rate, etc. That trend is going up quite steadily. It's been one of Apple's more successful products. We also know that now it's able to track things like menstrual cycles, right? So we're thinking about reproductive health and other things being tracked by these wearables. Some of you may have used one of these cues when we were all having to test a whole lot. This was sort of a home COVID testing device where you did the test, popped it in, it sent the results to your phone in just a few minutes. You didn't have to go to a doctor to get one of the fancy tests. They're also working on this for a number of flu, strep, and other diseases where you can just do your medical testing at home and get that data on your phone. This is going to require a lot more connectivity, right? Internet access is important. You want a healthy community that's using these sort of affordances. They're going to need access to broadband and mobile internet access, because that's going to be the thing. Not only will the digital divide affect us in terms of workforce and education, but it will also begin to affect us in terms of health. And it gets weird. It gets weird. Here you see these are the Second Sight's Argus 2. These are artificial eyes that were created to work with a headset that allowed the blind to see. And fairly low resolution, but they work. It's pretty amazing, this company, right? You can just use it, you pick it up with your kid, the camera walked on, but thing, all of a sudden you can see. Black and white, fairly low resolution, but it worked. Right, it's great, right up until it doesn't work. So then Argus, the Argus 2 company, Second Sight, decided that they couldn't sustain this economically, so they needed to get out of the business. And all of a sudden, there were about 350, 375 people with these devices that were installed. Then all of a sudden, they stopped getting software updates. They started going bad. It was causing some pain. It caused problems with getting MRI. There is now a very lucrative black market for spare parts. People have begun to cannibalize parts as they've had them removed to keep the people with their units up and going. So when we think about amazing things in the future, it's great to build, it's great to create, it's hard to maintain. So how do we think about maintaining the things that we unleash on the world? And it gets even stranger, right? We talked about that show, The Peripheral, where the character gets a medicine for her mother that's printed at a local pharmacy company called Pharmajon, right? Printing of drugs in your garage, 100% possible with off-the-shelf 3D printing components. We see people using CRISPR. Some of you may be familiar with the woman who invented this important technology that led to the COVID vaccines that we use today. This fellow over here just wanted beer that glows in the dark. So he's using CRISPR to make his beer glow in the dark, and he's not sure if he's broken any laws yet. But he's able to do this with affordable technology in his garage. You know, this fellow over here has injected CRISPR in himself to, relieve some headaches or increase muscle mass, right? So this biohacking that's probably going on in garages in your community today, how do we begin to regulate that? How do we begin to harness that sort of innovation and entrepreneurial thinking without causing public harm? How do we do that? All right, social, technological, now we want to get into economic. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you one of the biggest economic trends over the next 30 years is electrification of our economy. Specific electric vehicles are one of the biggest aspects of that. As you can see from the chart here, this is what we like to see, hockey stick growth in this area. But if you look at the color breakdown, you see that the United States is far behind the rest of the world. If you think Tesla is a great company, let me encourage you to Google the Chinese company BYD, which is just kind of like really, it's compare BYD to Tesla and then get back to me and see what you think. But the Chinese are clearly outpacing us in every regard when it comes to electrification of their fleet. Now what this has led to is a massive need for building batteries as good and as fast and as cheaply as we can. And so in the US, this is resulting in what we call the battery belt, right? Some of you seen this map, right? Kentucky actually happens to sit right in the middle of this battery belt. Turns out where you're building cars, the batteries are so heavy that it doesn't make economic sense to build them anywhere other than where the cars are being built, right? So car construction, battery construction, right? So you see here, these are the gigafactories that are generating like 1 gigawatt hour or greater annually of battery production every year. Kentucky has a couple or 4 of these going in. One is operational, the others we know are coming online, but these are coming everywhere. So this will impact the types of industrial jobs we think about going forward, right? It's very real. It's going to take a lot of not only building batteries, but refining the materials. Some of you may have seen that Elon Musk has asked the state of Texas to allow him to build a lithium refinement plant there next door to the massive Texas Tesla factory that's not too far from where I live. Demand for lithium is going to increase by about 90% over what we have today. If we want to get to those 2050 net zero goals, that's a lot of lithium, folks. It's a lot of lithium to make. It means we have to get better at doing more with less, in a way. One of the things that's been a real challenge for our economy is trying to do more with less, using less material inputs to produce the same or greater amounts of economic growth. We've managed to do this a little, right? It isn't a linear relationship anymore between population growth and resource use, but we're still not quite where we need to be. So by 2050, humanity could devour an estimated 140 billion tons of minerals, ores, fossil fuels, and biomass per year. This is 3 times what we currently use, unless we find a way to decouple economic growth from the rate of resource consumption. Now, the good news is there's already some smart people thinking about how to do this. We talk about the circular economy. How do the wastes then become inputs back into our industrial processes? How do we get less disposable materials into our system? So we're already thinking about, many of you using these products now, instead of just buying a whole deodorant, you buy a metal deodorant and you just buy replacements to put into it, or you're buying detergent to use in your household that doesn't come with. We spend a lot of fossil fuels shipping water around that comes to our house through like pipes and taps, right? So how do we begin to get more efficient with our resources? It's a critical challenge for us, and there will be industries built around doing this. There already are. We're going to learn to make things differently. For instance, if some of you might be wearing a Nike shoe or something like that, that takes a lot of materials. You can see the materials that go into a conventional sneaker there. And what you see here is what's called a sneaker. This is built out of more renewable materials like fungus, right? That is used to create materials, natural rubber, etc. Much fewer materials, more biodegradable, can go back into the use of, into the resource flow so that we use less materials going into the creation of our fashion items. A lot of people don't know that fashion is actually one of the big environmental no-nos right now. Our fast fashion trends, the cheap stuff that you see at the Gap or whatever is contributing a lot to environmental degradation. A lot of that stuff can't ever go back into the resource. We also need to figure out how to be more efficient with resources like concrete. We're going to keep up with our building needs, right? So one of the things that we have people looking at are materials that heal themselves, like concrete after being shattered contains these little spheroids with an algae or fungus that then secretes concrete, so that when it rains, it's producing concrete there and heals and patches itself. I wish they had this type of glass in my van after I mistakenly cracked my van windshield trying to change the wipers and had to order a Safelite, much to my chagrin. But these are the types of materials we're having. How about housing? Right? I know we have a few folks that are in the housing industry with us today. I heard someone say that would you like to have Austin's rate of growth? To that, I always say, be very careful what you wish for. You just may get it. Austin's housing situation is such that to keep up with pace, there's an area in East Austin that we have 3D printers running 24/7, printing houses out of concrete to keep up with housing demand. And then across the other side of Austin, near Camp Mabry, the U.S. Army is building the largest 3D printed housing development in the United States to keep up with its military housing needs. So instead of having people build a house, you may be printing a house in the future in Austin. We're already doing that. You gotta eat. Some of us like to eat more than others. But we gotta eat, right? And so agriculture and food security become an important thing. Some of you may be familiar with the company App Harvest. It's quite a lot of investment here in Kentucky is sort of indoor robotic farming. Eventually that may look like buildings in your urban planning that are buildings that are reclaimed and turned into vertical farms where fresh local produce can be grown to provide a solution to some of the food deserts that you will find that are created in communities due to forms of economic inequality. Some of you may have tried Impossible burgers at the grocery. I happen to love these, but I know a lot of folks have some issues. There's also meat that is actual real meat from meat cells. You clone them in a vat. Use pharmaceutical grade vats. You put in the resources, you clone this meat, and you get a nice package of hamburger that has the fat and the beef, and it's all animal cells, but it would require no animals to be killed to do that. So our food innovation, our food technology continues to change. There's a lot of money in Silicon Valley going into food tech right now. So it's a curious area for us in research, experimentation, and investment. And finally, when we think about economics, one of the things that is really interesting is this sort of generational change in terms of how younger people think about capitalism versus socialism. Now, we can debate what they mean when they tell us they support socialism, right? But one thing is clear, that since 2018, capitalism and socialism have been tied in popularity with the Zoomers and the millennials. Now, if you look at the data, though, it's a slightly more complicated picture than that, right? If you look at the data, what it tells you is that millennials and Generation Z actually aren't opposed to free market capitalism. Not huge numbers. They are opposed to big business, right? Large corporations. We've seen what some people call the Great Resignation. It actually isn't that. What might be better to think of as the Great Realignment, as people start to think about their economic productivity and alignment with their values. So what we see is younger people who are actually, when they say socialism, they don't mean anti-capitalism. They just mean not huge corporations. So when we think about how we think about designing our economic activity, are we really designing the types of entrepreneurial environments, the types of supportive economic environment to help younger people to create the types of businesses, work for the types of businesses that they think of, or are we missing out on each other? Now, environmental trends that we are covering every future. So I'm here to tell you that despite all of the happy face that the Biden administration might put on it, we're at COP27 right now, we are not on pace to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial norms. It's a fiction. You survey scientists who look at the policy decisions that are being made at these UN policies, they will tell you that we are looking at somewhere around 2.7 degrees temperature increase, probably closer to 3 at this point by the end of the century. Unless we think that it's something that's incredibly far off, let me tell you that we know that there is a 48% chance that we're going to hit that 1.5 degree temperature increase at least once during the next 5 years. Right now we're about 1.2, 1.3 degrees Celsius above it, and that's why we're getting some interesting weather environmental effects. But gambler's chance that we're already going to go ahead and hit that 1.5 over the next few years. In 2021, we figured out it's a major health concern. Extreme heat killed more Americans than any other weather-related disaster in 2021. Heat is a problem, and it's a problem globally. Some of you may have been keeping an eye on things this summer. In September, we hit that all-time heat records out west. Sacramento hit an all-time record of 116 degrees in Sacramento. If you like California wine, don't expect to enjoy it for too much longer than that. It does funny things to your grapes. In Europe, like some of you are like I am, my morning fun is to read the crop reports. I'm a fun guy, I don't know. European crop numbers are looking real bad, folks, because of these massive heat waves that they had in France, Spain, Portugal, northern Italy over the course of the summer. So we saw that in the UK, I still have some family there. Massive heat waves this summer. It was a bad summer for heat. Flooding, right? Some of you know I used to be the research director at the University of Kentucky Appalachian Center early in my career. One of the things we said there was that mountain people are mountain people the world over. And the summer boy, we figured that out, because not only did the mountain people of Kentucky endure significant, once in a century flooding, but so did the folks in Pakistan, where for months, Pakistan, about a third of Pakistan was underwater. If you want to look at the Pakistani wheat crop reports, go to and have some fun, right? It's hard. And what I tell my kids is don't think of the summer of 22 as the hottest summer of your life. Think of it as the coolest summer for the rest of your life. Like I said, we're fun. Lake Mead, we're talking about Bob wanted to go out and see Lake Mead as we were talking at dinner last night. Lake Mead is a fun place to be right now. You're seeing all the weighted down bodies and cars that the mob has sort of pushed off into Lake Mead over the years. That's not a joke, by the way. People are finding this one because Lake Mead has now dropped so low that it's likely that next year Lake Mead is going to drop below where it can safely bring enough water to operate those turbines. So that's a lot of megawatt hours that will start to go away, right? You can see it here in 1983 and then Lake Mead just last summer. This was the summer that rivers ran dry. So in China, you see the Yangtze River in Hubei province, dry. A couple older people setting up their garden chair in the middle of what once was a flowing river. We have the River Loire in France this summer that completely dried up. Some of you may have seen pictures recently. We're not too far down the run of the Mississippi River there in Tennessee. There are big chunks of the Mississippi River that have now run dry. You can walk out almost all the way to the middle of the Mississippi River. Those areas of the Platte River in Nebraska is completely dry for miles of its run. So the rivers have run dry this year. In Monterrey, Mexico, second largest city in Mexico, and its primary industrial city, the heart of economic production in Mexico, the taps literally ran dry. One day the people of Monterrey woke up, turned on their taps to make coffee in the morning, and there was no water coming out of the tap. So water scarcity is something to think about. And the problem is that in the U.S. we tend to grow right now where the water isn't. All that migration over the last half a century has been from places where there is water to places where there is increasingly less water. And the heat is following, right? And it's not like we have cities on big wheels and we're driving all the cities south, but in reality, the temperature is such that the city of Louisville is effectively moving to Little Rock, Arkansas over the next 20 to 30 years. Louisville's daily temperatures will feel a lot like Little Rock, Arkansas by the middle of the century. Rust Belt cities need to get ready for this. Here on the right, you see a map of projected extreme heat days in our early 2050s. This is where the heat index is over 100 degrees for a certain number of days, and you see that's pretty bad. Kentucky actually comes out pretty nicely. Northern Kentucky, as we were talking about dinner last night, ends up being sort of the lower end of the good place to be on this, right? Put it this way. Companies, chip manufacturers, semiconductor manufacturers are already leaving California to go to Arizona because of water issues. Folks, if you're moving to Arizona for water, you may be in trouble, right? So they may be moving and relocating here. So we know that Ohio has experienced significant growth in terms of chip fabs, these semiconductor manufacturing facilities that are coming. Places like Northern Kentucky are ideally positioned to grow this population. And it is coming, right? We've already seen what's called climate gentrification. If you're so far above where what we call sunny day or nuisance flooding happens, flooding that happens just with the tides or happening in Little Havana in Miami, that is the story of your future unless you get ahead of that issue. So climate gentrification, we know that people are moving away from where houses are exposed. Insurers are already aware of this. When asked what sort of data they are taking into account, insurers will tell you they're very much taking into account long-range weather, climate, temperature data, water access when thinking about insurability. In fact, just this summer, 8 of Louisiana's largest homeowners insurance companies went bankrupt. Just this summer, 8. Louisiana Citizens, which is the homeowners insurance of last resort, has said that they are set to increase 2023 rates by about 63%. And wait till you find out what happens around Fort Myers after that last storm. If you are wanting to reinsure, and I say this as someone whose stepfather-in-law lives in Fort Myers, had about 3 feet of water, and that was 4 miles in from shore during the storm, it's going to be almost impossible to insure homes in southern Florida going forward. Now this creates a really interesting bit of what we might think of as mental and emotional distress. Some of you have heard about the term eco-anxiety. We actually have a lot of high schools and universities that are beginning to provide counseling resources for students who are suffering from near debilitating eco-anxieties. The reality of these things come in. And then we have another health condition that we can call solastalgia. Mental health condition where it's a form of emotional or existential distress that's produced by environmental change that impacts people while they are directly connected to their home environment. As your home environment changes, the forest around you, the landscape around you changes due to climate impact, it begins to create this form of nostalgia for an environment that no longer exists and will not exist again. So we need to think about mental health and care for mental health as we think about climate change. Now this is all a pretty grim picture. Doesn't mean we just throw our hands up and have a big party for the end of the world and give up and get all doomy. Oh no, it does not. I'm here to tell you don't have time for that, right? The good news is that Americans have extreme support for a range of climate decisions, innovations, technologies that we can already use to begin to combat these problems. Everything from planting trees to electrifying our automobiles and creating more renewable energy resources. We can begin to address these challenges. How might we do it? Well, you see here, these are a couple of what we call direct air capture plants from a company called Climeworks. These are basically big vacuum cleaners that suck CO2 out of the air. And in the case of these 2 plants, they turn it into this calcium carbonate, like a little crumbling rock that you can build things out of. Again, if you're watching that show, The Peripheral, you see these big statues over London. Those are actually, if you look in them, freeze-framed it, look for little fans running, and that's because those are direct air capture things like these, pulling in that carbon, and they're building big public statues of it, right? In Kentucky, we are actually a perfect place for this technology, and it just drives me crazy that places like Texas and Louisiana are beating us to the punch, because you can build these plants, suck that CO2 out of the air, and pump it back into the karst geography underneath much of the state of Kentucky and store it safely and permanently while beginning to draw down some of that carbon to give us more time to realign our economy. It's a great place for this, right? So people are already building these. These are in operation. You see a lot of funding for these in the Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed. Carbon air capture is going to be big. Renewable energy. What we know is that renewable energy capacity grew by 280 gigawatts in 2020, grew by another 280 gigawatts and more in 2021, and we expect to see that happen again year over year. It's becoming the cheapest form of energy production. Renewables, whether wind or solar, I have to take my son to university in Lubbock, and as we drive the 6 hours from Austin to Lubbock, you are surrounded by fields of farms of nothing but big, giant wind turbines. Texas Tech University it doesn't have the capacity to crank out all of the wind energy engineers that it needs for our economy. We just can't teach people fast enough. It's a big area ripe for potential education. Again, we are electrifying things fairly quickly, though, as you see here again on that chart on the left, we're well behind the rest of the world. Even within the U.S., there are mass inequalities in terms of how fast we are electrifying our fleet of vehicles. It should not surprise you that we have significant divisions on this in our country. Older Americans tend to not be as much in favor of replacing ICE engines with electric engines. Younger people tend to be more in favor of it. Republicans tend to be less. Democrats tend to be more. We have some interesting social divisions around this really interesting economic and environmental opportunity. In Kentucky, we're really getting hit hard, right? Kentucky only has 0.26% of all of the nation's registration of electric vehicles. That's not 2.6%, that's not 26%, that's that. If we take all the electric vehicle registrations, we're that little bitty ones that circle there. So Kentucky is not only is the U.S. behind, but Kentucky is behind significantly chunks of the U.S. That's okay, though, in the short term, because the vast bulk of our electrification is actually not happening with cars, right? If you look at where electrification is happening, buses. Where's electrification happening? Bikes, 2- and 3-wheel vehicles. In fact, some of you probably saw that Rivian, the company that makes these electric trucks that are right? They're saying we're going to start making bikes, right? Because electric bikes are a huge opportunity. And this is good because remember what I told you about how much lithium we were going to need? Sometimes do the math for yourself. How much of a battery does it take to move one person to work? Move one person to school? Take one person to church? How much does it take, right? Well, to move one person on an e-bike, right, you need 50 pounds of battery. Say you've got a lightweight electric vehicle, those cute little 3-wheel Polarises, you know, those little things, right? You're looking at 500 pounds. An electric truck, one of those electric Silverados or Ford F-150s that nobody in Texas can seem to get their hands on right now, but want very badly, 5,000 pounds. If you're going to drive a Hummer and one person's in one of those big electric crab walking Hummers, that's how much battery you're going to need. Now, we have to think efficiently about how to use our lithium because we're going to have to electrify a lot more than just our individual vehicles, but it's important to think about. In Texas, though, you won't see people trying to sell you an electric truck because it's good for the environment. That's not how it's called, right? But what they will tell you is like every time you go see all the commercials, will tell you a Ford F-150, it'll keep the light on for 3 days if our rickety old grid goes down, right? In Texas, which it did last February, right? That's how they're selling them, right? These things are sold as backup generators for the whole home, in addition to being able to do your farm work, right? And resiliency is why people tend to want this sort of electrification. 1 out of every 5 U.S. homeowners worry about power outages every single week. 1 out of every 3 U.S. homeowners consider solar battery storage because they're worried about power outages, right? You see some communities that are actually electrifying their school bus fleets using federal grant dollars, and then they hook those back up to the community power grid, and they function as a community battery in case your grid goes down during a storm, right? How about decarbonizing how we get stuff, right? Stuff that's shipped to us, stuff that's flown to us, maybe us that's flown to stuff, right? Massive decarbonization there. Maersk is looking at using green hydrogen as a way to decarbonize its entire fleet. It's going to have to basically stop building non-battery or green hydrogen powered vessels by 2030 in order to meet its goals. This is happening extremely quickly. Maersk is the company that is the world's biggest Dutch company, built those big, massive container ships that get stuck in the Suez Canal and ruin your Christmas, right? But they're electrifying those quickly. Planes, right? We have a very important airport here in our area. We're very lucky to have such a resource available to us. Electric planes and other eVTOLs become increasingly important. In fact, we see the Hart Aerospace ES-30. We have a number of airlines. United is already buying this. Delta is already buying this. Here you see Air Canada is already buying these. And these are electric planes that carry 30 passengers. They have about 125 miles on battery. Now that's not far enough to get you from CVG to ORD or CVG to ATL, right? Not yet. 250 miles gets you pretty close, right? And that's if you're using some backup fuel, right, to help power. But even though we're not there yet, you want to see the growth curve on this. It's so fast, right? And it's critical because the aviation industry is expected to triple this 1 billion tons of CO2 it puts into the air every year by 2050. So it's a right target for that. Now, what might it look like if it's not electric planes? Well, I'm glad you asked, right? Turns out, airships. I can hear some of you going, oh, the humanity, right? You see the Hindenburg burning before you, and that is not this type of airship, right? This is from a company called Hybrid Air Vehicles in London, not London, Kentucky, but London, UK. But there are other companies that are built by tremendous growth opportunity. This is one that can carry 72 to 100 passengers, has 466 miles of range, so it can absolutely get you from CBG to all of your regional airports to begin to connect. And it will carry up to 10 tons of cargo. This thing is coming out for delivery. You have airlines already purchasing these to run people and to run cargo. This thing's going to start shipping in 2025. We're already gearing up the manufacturing process. Now the problem is they're slow. Right? You're used to being able to jet off from CBG to ORD, hit the bright lights in Chicago within just like an hour and a half. And that thing is going about 455 miles an hour as it goes through the skies. This thing is only doing top speed of about 80 miles an hour. So slow travel, but it is cultural. On the other hand, this thing is like fantastic in the environment and can move a ton of cargo, right? You can see CBG using a lot of these with the UPS sticker or Amazon sticker or other stickers on the side. We have a tremendous opportunity for infrastructure that we're going to have to begin to address. Here you see in the bottom picture, these were the roads in July 2021 outside of Seattle, Washington, where the heat was so high that it was buckling and breaking the roads because they just weren't built to endure that sort of temperature, right? We know that in places, this is not a real image, but it is an architect's image. We know in France, for instance, buildings in France need to have a white painted roof or a garden roof now to cut down on sort of that urban heat island effect. And we also know that urban forestry, how many trees that you plant, how many parks that you have a significant impact in public health impacts from heat, because what we know is that lower income, often African American and Latino neighborhoods and cities have a much lower urban tree cover, and this means that the temperature is often 2 to 3 degrees higher on a daily basis in those neighborhoods. It's an equity issue as much as it is a development issue. Look, we're already doing this. Whisper Valley, this is the hottest neighborhood. If you can get a house in this neighborhood that is, if you can even get on the waiting list now, you're really lucky. You're building this in Austin, not too far from where I live. This is Whisper Valley, Texas. It does not look like a science fictional universe, right? But what this is a neighborhood that is built where it is basically energy neutral. It's got solar on all the houses, so it's generating electricity. Has a community geothermal network under the whole neighborhood, which means basically your heating and cooling are free, right, as a result of the infrastructure. Now that's built into the cost of your house, but you're not paying electric bill or worried if your ERCOT grid is going down. This neighborhood is hot. There are plans to build this over and over and over again. It is resilient. It is environmentally friendly. It is a job creator. It is a public health, a big aid to public health. We're already doing it, and it's not science fiction, right? What will it look like in 20, 30 years? What would Northern Kentucky look like if it begins to think about building in this way? And finally, some of you may have noticed a few days ago there was an announcement from the Biden administration that they're funding a 5-year research plan on reflective, how do you say it, solar intervention. It was like it's geoengineering. Basically, this is the idea that we have to find ways to bend the environment to reduce heating to give ourselves a chance to decarbonize our economy, right? So it's highly likely that by 2037, some country like India, most likely, will fly big cargo planes up into the air and drop a bunch of sulfur into the atmosphere, right? There's tons of sulfur up into the air, and that begins to reflect sunlight, right, in certain areas to reduce heating. Now this has the unfortunate side effect of moving water around from one part of the planet to another in some unusual ways. Saudi Arabia is already planning on doing some of this as well. That's going to impact monsoon season in India. It could impact water patterns even here in northern Kentucky, what we're doing there. So this is a potential geopolitical crisis in the making, but it's also something that the U.S. is beginning to do research on because, like I said, despite what you hear in public press releases about 1.5, the smart money already knows that that is out of the question. So how do we save ourselves? And geoengineering is a tremendous opportunity in that regard. And finally, we want to talk to you about political trends. Right? When we talk about the future, like if a futurist comes to you and only talks to you about technology, check your wallet. right? A lot of those guys are kind of hupstery, right? Good ones will like give you these cross books. So we've talked about social, we've talked about technology, we've talked about economy and environment, and now we need to talk about politics a little bit. The world is becoming less globalized than it has been. In the 90s, the rah-rah 90s, it was like globalization is going to save us all. And we've basically seen the beginning of the unwinding of that over the last 5 years or so. If you look here, these were the folks who voted yes or no on the isolation of Russia's economy or the Ukrainian situation. You'll see some countries that abstained that are fairly large economies there. Okay, we got a problem. The internet. Everybody loves the internet. The internet is made of cats, right? At least that's all my wife sends me on Instagram. It's like these cat videos, right? But that one internet that connects and binds the world is also beginning to fall apart. So some of you know about the Great Firewall of China, right? Which largely limits in and out of Chinese. You can educate students in China during the pandemic. Got your first taste of how difficult it is for information to flow freely on our internet. Some of you will know that the EU has passed a number of regulations that significantly impact privacy and privacy rights, the rights to be forgotten. They're doing with regulation what we don't do in the sense of protecting individuals. And so there are a lot of U.S. companies that are having a hard time operating within the EU's internet space. Russia just did a test last summer. They have a switch they can throw that completely cuts the Russian internet off from the rest of the world when it comes to self-sustaining internal internet. And now the competition is whose side will Africa be on, right? Is it going to be the Chinese internet, which is being built out pretty quickly in a lot of places in Africa? Will it be the U.S. internet? Will it be the EU? Africa's a real future sort of conflict zone in terms of which internet will you see their economy being tapped into. Why does it matter? The most populous country in the middle of the century is going to be Nigeria. Lagos will be the biggest city on the planet sometime around mid-century. Africa matters more than ever, so it's good to pay attention to that. Now, this doesn't mean as the internet falls apart that weird stuff won't happen. Some of you have probably already been victims in your businesses or your institutions for ransomware attacks. We went through a lot of that. Your gas prices took a nice hike because of that cyber attack on Colonial Pipeline about 18 months or so ago. You had cities like a small Florida town that couldn't pay out its Social Security checks because of ransomware shutting down its computer systems. Some of you may know that there was a Florida city that had to shut down its water treatment plant because someone had hacked into their water treatment facility and put too much chlorine into it, so the water was effectively poisoned. Fortunately, they caught it in time, but these are the sorts of interesting hacks. We talked about growing that cloned meat in vats, right? And some of those places already have gotten attacked by cyber. You just alter that formula a little bit. Imagine you spoil like months worth of meat as our food supply becomes more susceptible to attacks like we found out in meat plants in 2020, 2021 with those cyber attacks. So it gets weird, and it keeps getting weirder, right? So we know that misinformation is a huge problem on our internet right now. I watched this happen in real time. This was kind of fun. Russia shut down all access to Instagram, right, on March 13th. A week later, I saw Tulsi Gabbard on Fox News, who was saying that she was being censored by Instagram because the number of likes on her videos dropped by from 200 to 250,000 views only days after Russia shut it down. Now you could call that a coincidence. Maybe she's being censored. Maybe it's just that we don't have as many Russian bots at that time, going around liking and manipulating things. It's really interesting, right? If you were having kids on TikTok, which by the way, we don't allow TikTok in my house. No, kids can't have it on their phones. We don't have it. When Speaker Pelosi was overseas at Taiwan, the amount of sort of anti-Pelosi, anti-Democrat propaganda that started being issued by Chinese sources on TikTok around the time of that visit had an actual noticeable effect on U.S. public opinion before and after the manipulations that TikTok exercised.
TikTok is becoming a really powerful manipulator of American public opinion. It's really quite fascinating, right? And sometimes even fact checks are like fake, and you don't know if the fact check is real. So during Ukraine, you had Russian counterintelligence operations declaring you're making fact checks against Ukrainian statements that were themselves fake and pass them off through legitimate news sources. So who knows what to trust these days? And that's why, we just have this tremendous need for cybersecurity. Colleges and community colleges and workforce development needs to be cranking this out. We have a need we have a need for another 359,000 cybersecurity workers. And in education, we're not doing nearly enough to do digital education and digital literacy for students so they can effectively parse what it is that they find on the internet. So that they can begin to distinguish fact from fiction, and it's a critical need. Our political divisions, I wish I could tell you something, but we're all going to kind of come together, but the trends are all in the opposite direction. In that case, we see that there continue to be huge divides on almost every public policy issue between, say, Trump voters and non-Trump voters. We know that over the last few years, we can take a look at the polarizing language that's on our Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all that, and we know that that's becoming incredibly and rapidly even more angry, more divisive. Here we go, people doing the semantic analysis. You can see that over the last year or so, that's just hockey stick right on up. And this is spilling over to violence in the streets. I mean, there's actual conflict between opposing left and right political groups on the streets of Portland, where they're kind of shooting each other, largely with paintball, but not exclusively, on the streets of Portland. So that division is there. As we go into election season, you'll see a lot of coverage about insufficient numbers of election workers. If you have any out here, thank you for your service, right? More important than ever. But we have these conflicts, even our elections legitimate. Even in the city of Louisville, you had a mayoral candidate who there was an attempt on his life during the primary. So this idea that when candidates run, we get good candidates to run for public office, and we all want people, regardless of your party or political affiliation, we need good candidates to run. And now we have this sort of public political violence on that. We can start coming further apart in terms of our policy views. So when you saw laws about LGBTQ protections, when you saw abortion bills that were being passed before sort of the reversal of Roe versus Wade, you begin to see these things. And even during the early days of COVID-19, you began to see the U.S. sort of break up into these interesting clusters, right? Kentucky was a part of like this Midwest alliance with other governors taking COVID measures. You had the New England Regional Advisory Council. You had the Western States Pact. And this may look kind of depressing, but let me tell you, I actually see a little bit of optimism in this as we think about governance, right? Is that when all else fails, people of good intention can come together and cooperate in local and state government to get things done and begin to address the problems that we've seen today that so urgently face us. So as we think about what do we do in the future, we need to think about not that, we're flying apart, because we are, but we also are finding new ways to come together, to have shared governance at the local and regional level to tackle those problems. So rather than thinking what national government is going to save us, we can begin to think about how can, say, Boone, Campbell, and Kenton counties begin to work together to address their own regional issues. And that is a real position of strength here. And I'd like to leave you with this quote from one of my favorite futurists, New York Yankees catcher and manager, Yogi Berra, who tells us that it gets late early out there. So we can make a difference. We see these trends. The future that's ahead is going to be bright if we take advantage of the insight that foresight provides us today. And so before we get into it, I just want to say thank you for your time. If you want to reach out, drop us a line anytime. You can get me at refuturing.com, or you can find me under LinkedIn at Christopher Stoplights. And so with that, I think, do I need to go ahead and give the instructions?
I think Katie's going to come up.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. That was a lot of information. My name is Katie Answeiler. I'm the marketing manager at Von Lehman, CPA and advisory firm. We have captains at each table to assist with the discussion today. Thank you to the table captains from Von Lehman and the other community leaders who are serving in this capacity this afternoon. They'll identify themselves at your table, and for those that maybe just have fewer people, you can go ahead and combine. Chris will provide instructions for the next portion of our program in a moment. We encourage everyone to stay in a futuristic mindset, utilizing the trend data and information from earlier in the program as you consider these next few exercises. Remember the scenarios we presented earlier as we aspired, imagined, and implemented towards our OneNKY community of the 22nd century. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here today, for your energy and commitment to Northern Kentucky. Chris, back to you.
Thank you. And before we get started, I want to invite my friend Bob Howell to come up, because Bob and I had, Bob had a few words of inspiration I thought would help set you off on the right path, and then I'm going to give you some instructions for what to do with the next exercises. Bob.
So I'm going to use my rubber band one more time. So this is that creative tension that we talked about. We certainly have stretched the rubber band after that talk, have we not? Yes. Here's what happens in too many communities. The envisioned future, the tension gets resolved not by raising the current reality, but rather by compromising the vision. Why? Because leaders aren't willing to spend the social capital needed. Elected officials aren't willing, don't have the political will to make it happen. Or leaders like you in a room weren't willing to stretch it that much more, to put that big, hairy, audacious goal out there. Let's not be that community that resolves the tension in the wrong direction. Let's be that community that takes it to the next level. Let's get busy, Chris.
Thanks, Bob. And I think that's a really inspiring way to think about it. So as we look, okay, so hopefully you took some plenty of good notes on our trend landscape canvas board that should have given you some raw ingredients to take into this next exercise. What we're going to do is take all of those inputs, and the first exercise that we're going to work on is this aspiration to action canvas. Let's see, you should have that canvas, and then you should have this one. Sorry, we're going to start with this one, the trend impact canvas. And what I'd like you to do, and you can do this individually as a group, and table captains, please. We're going to ask you to report out, but on your sheets, I'd love the table captains to sort of collect the consensus of the group onto your sheet so that we can collect those up, scan those in, and give a report back out to you all after the event. But if you would put the number of your table onto your table captain sheet so that we know what table that's coming from. And so I'd love you to start with this. We need to pick 5 trends as a group, and then I want you to do a little brainstorming about each of these trends. What might be the second order impact? So it's not just enough that, we can think of concrete that heals itself in rain, but what might be the second order impact of that? We might say, we need to do more in terms of shared governance to deal with trends rather than waiting on a federal solution. What's the second order impact of that? What does that imply? So I want you to spend about 15 minutes maybe thinking through that. And then we're going to give you a heads up so that you can go and take a look at your other canvas, which is where we're going to take those trends. And then as Bob has encouraged us, we want to think about what big audacious things can we do as a community, working together. What big things can we do to address these challenges of the future, holding that creative tension, as Bob tells us, so that we're not sort of lowering our vision of the future, but raising our willingness to take on the big things. And we want you to record those there. And on that plus and minus, and I'll remind you to get to it, there are always forces kind of working against the future and forces that are pulling us into the future. Think about some things that could be helpful in supporting that big audacious goal and some things that might be working against it as well so we can be better strategy.
One is so if you move the technology every water.
Great. So as we work through this first canvas where we think about the impact, which is really the so what, right? You can get all kinds of information, but if you don't have a so what, it becomes difficult to get motivated to address that. So as you think about these trends and the impacts, the so what, start to think about moving over into your next worksheet, which is where you take those trends and we start to say, okay, if these are 5 trends that we think are going to have some impact on our community, on Northern Kentucky, what might we do, right, in our organizations as a community, as an alliance, to begin addressing these trends as we try to, because it gets late early out there, what are we going to do now to begin to take advantage or to prepare for some of these impacts? So we want to come up with some big, audacious, again, creative tension, right? Stretch that rubber band by aiming high. What can we do to begin to address these trends as a community? So I'll leave you with that. Okay, so I've heard a lot of conversation. It was interesting to see some of the, each table sort of had its different set of takeaways and thoughts on that. And now I think as a group, we'd love to hear that. So we have someone that I think is going to come around and bring a mic to the tables. Awesome. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to go around to the tables, and then if the table captain would just start, because we have some folks taking some notes, so we really want to capture your thoughts, your takeaways, your insights, your big ideas. So we're going to be taking some of those notes, and if the table captain could just start by saying, hey, it's table number 8, table number 2, whatever it is, and then begin to share out your takeaways, your so what's, what were the trends that were really capturing your attention, and did you come up with 1 or 2 sort of big audacious moves to begin addressing those potential futures. So we'd like you to do that. Again, tell us your table, and table captains also, if you could make sure to keep your worksheets together, we're going to take those in and I'm going to scan those and do a report back out for OneNKY so that we can really make sure that your voices are being heard and help us to bring that future into being. So if we'll start out, if you could just tell us your table and then talk about your ideas, takeaways, and big moves.
My name is Jeff Bass, and I'm going to represent tables 7, 3, 2, 5. That's not regionalization coming together. So thank you all for just hearing us out for a brief moment. We have really 5 significant trends, as you would suspect, and as we expect here from many of you. Education, technology, economic inequity, political and social, entrepreneurial, and strategic, visionary, right? We'll start with where we really honed in on. We're going to focus on 2 areas that are so near and dear to this table's heart. First is education. Our audacious trend is to find a way to make an actionable approach happen in the Northern Kentucky learning communities that changes and affords our children in K through 12 the opportunity to have personalized educational and literacy experiences. So just let that sink in for a moment. That's changing the foundation of how our educational system is working today. That is met with a very audacious move of finding and mobilizing what is working well today, investing in that, but then most importantly, being willing to embrace what's going to come next, which is the blowback and the change impact to make it happen. So I'll just stop there and ask, anybody like to reflect on that? Wait a minute.
We're sitting at a place where it's amazing for the kids who are here. Think of the roughly 4,600 kids who are going to graduate this year from Northern Kentucky high schools. Don't have it. Every student has a right what are the possibilities out there. And it should start no later than high school, getting a chance to learn and experience those things so that every kid has, by the time they graduate, a plan that fits them, that they truly believe in. We've got to stop the number of kids who are graduating with no idea what they really want to do.
Well said. He said much better than I did. Thank you very much. All right, so the next trend, which led to some big audacious goals, and I have to thank Judge Moore for this, we're going to skip over technology. As scary as technology can be, we have to embrace it. We're also going to skip over economic inequity. There's far brighter minds in the room, and entrepreneurial and visionary. We're going to focus in on political and social. And at this table, we felt it was very important that we recognize within our 3 counties a need to potentially change the way we leverage our election cycles to go nonpartisan where. Basically breaking away potentially from self-preservation, not make it about party lines, but make it about what is best for the community, the county, and the region. So Judge Moore, I'm going to give the mic to you because you said it best. But it starts by really taking a radical shift in the way we have always operated, always looked at, and always handled our elections around our county officials, not just the judges, executive.
Thank you. We were talking about how few people vote in our county elections and how we become a one-party system. Therefore, in Boone County, 12,000 people out of 136,000, 12,000 voted in the primary and chose who the judge executive candidate that moves on to November will be. Fortunately, I won that race. I have not had a Democratic opponent in 20 years. So there's so much at stake in these races. I'm going to change it to another race. Your property valuation administrator. Somebody that has to pass a test to run. They're doing they're performing a duty and setting value for property. They have to pass the test. They run as Republican or Democrat. And it's just to the point where I believe that these elections, like city elections, if 2 people run for mayor, you have the runoff in November. Everybody votes. They can both be Democrat or be Republican, whatever it might be, independent. I think our county elections should be the same. You have the runoff in the primary. If you have more than 2 candidates, the top 2 finishers in the primary run in November. Everybody votes. And that's how you decide who your county leaders are. It is such a system today that it's very possible that a handful of people, very radical one way or the other, can control the region.
Thank you, Judge. And ladies, I would be remiss, hold on one moment, if I didn't ask, do you have anything you would like to add to the conversation? So Gina, Deidre, Katie, phenomenal job, thank you all. I'm handing it off to this table. Where do you want me to go?
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Thank you all.
All right, we're table 6. Bunch of guys. And so we as you would expect from this group, but we did it differently. I would say, just in terms of the strategic aspiration, it was kind of how we talked about a lot of the different trends and thinking about, if we're going to become a healthy community that's educated with social mobility, with diversity and equity and high value, with policies for governance and infrastructure that's based on today, not 150 years ago, and also being properly situated with technologies such as EV adoption and renewals, then, it's really easy to get into stratosphere thinking about this. But I think our group and having Nick Crum at the table was very helpful in this. Because it was like, can we do 2 things? Can we get every 3rd grader in Northern Kentucky to read at level? Can we do that? If we can, then we can do other things. And can we decrease the child mortality and not be at the bottom of the list? I mean, if you think of it in terms of importance, in terms of strategic importance, Those two things could indicate that A, we care, and B, we can move the needle as a community. And so that's kind of where we landed. There's other stuff on the paper as well, but I thought that was very insightful on this group. It's just, can we do two things?
Again, if you can give us your table number, then you can. Yeah.
Table 16, we'll take that table 5. So we talked a lot about, kind of to piggyback on the table 6s, I like the thing of like, if we can take care of certain things, like a lot more can happen and a lot of other things will be taken care of. So we really spent, with the great Brighton Center here, talked about kind of a strategic redirection of post-secondary ed programs. From Chris's presentation, the micro-credential statistic really stuck out at us, and then a little later you had the cyber. I know you are. And so our region between AU and Gateway doing great things, but if there was a way to, and that got into our big audacious goal, or our big audacious move, if there is a way to just really, push the pedal to the metal on that and accelerate what we're already doing. And by aligning those, we thought we're building capacity, number one. Lee and Brett talked about it with workforce needs and economic development, growing our economy here. It helps with income. We know it helps with public health. Gets a little bit into helping solve housing issue, et cetera, et cetera. So that was our big one large takeaway was accelerating that post-secondary ed and industry partnership pipeline, workforce pipeline. That was it. Okay, cool. Now back to the table. You still don't, you're still not ready. Table 17.
Our tables 15 and 18 we combined. You guys have already hit upon a few things that we've already discussed, but again, we spent a great deal of time talking about aligning early education K-12 with the needs of our community. Somebody's already touched on that. Another one had to do with transportation. And as wonderful as CBG is and all the advancements that they are making and successes that they are enjoying now, we kind of see CBG possibly not just being a package mover, but a people mover. So to bring people from other parts of the state, other regions, to the area to help fill positions here, or just to allow them to maybe help with the housing issue, live in other areas of the state where maybe it's a little more affordable, they have family roots there, things of that nature, to embrace some of the technology to bring them to different places to work versus where they live. The other thing we kind of touched on was the need for community buy-in. Northern Kentucky is very compartmentalized. We have, 36 cities, and we have lots of organizations taking a very close look at some of our issues and challenges that we have. What we need to do is to not be fearful, fortune favors the brave, and to get our egos out of the way. Who's going to get credit for successes? We can't worry about that anymore. So there's a little bit of relational and emotional business that needs to be done in order to have successes. Anybody want to add anything else to that?
Although you guys had such great momentum here. So our group, echoing, it's hard to believe we actually had almost verbatim what you all had. So that's true Northern Kentucky spirit right there. One thing we did hone in on was activating and preserving green spaces as we see environmental changes here. And what does that sustainability and resiliency look like for our community? As we mentioned, the pandemic didn't stop this trend as we have more urbanized communities. People are living closer. What are we doing to keep those spaces as we improve the air quality, the emissions, as people are living closer together and they want to still interact with the
physical environment as well as the built environment and what that relationship looks like. And as a part of that, what do alternative energy sources look like in the community? As there is the, if you do have an electric vehicle, I'm sure you may at times have the range anxiety, but now it's the reliance on the grid. Are there actually charging stations? Will the grid go down? And in those situations, so that became certainly a strategic aspiration as we see some of the initiatives that we have in our region and what we can do to preserve those green spaces, activate them, and ensure that we have a healthy community moving forward. All right, next.
So I think one thing we haven't really talked about is housing and communal living, and that was such an interesting concept of how to do multi-generational communal living and how it can change transportation, how we look at transportation, and how we look at the impact on environment, reducing carbon footprints. And then Dan had an excellent one about, he called it the center of excellence. I can never do this justice of how you explain it, so I'm going to let you do it.
I'm so thrilled. Where I interjected was, we've got sort of this distribution and manufacturing hub because of our geography. In spite of the fact that we might end up in Arkansas someday, that will remain. My vision of that is as long as we're, staring at the future with a clear lack of a labor force, that we should be aspirational about being the center of excellence around distribution technology and transforming all that labor into the pictures we saw on that screen today, which is essentially, having, all of that automation start to, begin to sort of supplant, the labor market here. So no reason, due respect to Lee, I know, we're very good at sort of ticking through, let's get everybody to read and these types of things, but I think that's a clear leapfrog type of thing that we can do to be much more aspirational and transformational here using assets we already have.
I could never think the same way, so I appreciate that and pass on.
Well, our table looks a little smaller than when it started with all of the input, but our group ranged almost a 40-year age range. So it was kind of fun, the conversation that we were having. But there are so many highlights that came out of our discussion, but we want to kind of come back to Dan's point of sort of that central hub where we see ourselves as being the ability to be the heartbeat. But we focused on the fusion of agriculture and technology. You might imagine the farmer, Lauren, we couldn't resist the fusion though of the two. And so the vertical farming perspective is brilliant, but recognizing the geothermal capabilities as well. And John was digging down deep, maybe going deep, because you don't need to farm with pesticides and such if you go a little deeper in the ground. Or as Laura was saying, one of our big audacious ideas is in fact, let us be the hub of making that tractor trailer that we can then ship to another location and produce vegetables. We're going to be the mobile producers. We're very good, we're very productive here in Kentucky. So, and of course we have access to tremendous amounts of tractor trailers and such. So let's put those to use. The other big audacious move would be that fusion of agriculture with fashion, because we certainly have the ability to grow hemp like no other. And I love the explanation of the shoes made of so many natural materials, but it's not just shoes, the seats on the automobile. And you also saw the way we're the hub of making autos and such. We've got the most durable fibers that can come from hemp and such. So we like the fusion of fashion with agriculture. And then I added number 3, Judge Moore, having as a candidate for election, I like the idea of simplifying this election process and not being so daggone partisan. This is brutal. So I'm with you on that. I wrote that one down. Thanks.
All right. This will be a little short and sweet. Your tables 14 and 21.
A lot of the topics that have been discussed already have kind of been covered on this sheet here, but a couple of ones here that I think kind of stick out. Lack of housing that working families can afford. So, that's kind of that's an area that I think, a lot of working families, are directly affected by. And it's just really, it's challenging because it's like, you're working hard and, a ton of your money goes toward rent or whatnot. And I'm not sure if y'all saw the article earlier this year, but the Cincinnati metro area increased its rent by a higher percentage than any other metro area in the nation. I think it was like February or something like that. So that's a big issue. It says here, non-traditional ways to finance density and overcome the public will to limit housing. I mean, these are, the solution for this is going to be multifaceted, but really it's about, finding ways to make it so that, people can, find a path to home ownership, being able to be, independent and, building that personal wealth is a huge key factor there. Because you don't want the economy to leave these people behind. And then, let me see here. Another one was poor education outcomes in areas. So, it's like, you want to focus on skill acquisition. Reimagine career and college pathways. And, there's so much right now that's focused on test scores. It makes it really challenging for the students and for the faculty alike. It's hard because it's like you have so many leaders in education that they're there and they've seen the test scores throughout their career impact pretty much everything that is associated with education, and changing that perspective it takes a lot. So a lot of creativity to move toward there. So anyway, those are two. Ready to move on?
We are lucky table number 13. Our goal, what we thought would be the best, would be having some type of shared governance. One of the things we looked at healthcare, we looked at education, we looked at transportation. Is there a way, instead of like I think the table down there mentioned the 36 different communities we have in Northwest Kentucky, can we have like one shared vision? Which I know is always difficult because we're all human beings and we all have our opinions and we want to be in charge. But can we go ahead and somehow have a shared vision that will allow us to get all those other aspects done that much quicker and that more and better? That's what we got for table 13.
All right, table 9, Divine 9. We had a robust discussion on many of the topics that were already talked about, but I'll just try to hit on a couple newer points on a few marketing lines, I think, here at the table. With the rebranding that's starting, how do we really go big with that? Maybe we rename the community, rename our Northern Kentucky community in some very significant way, link with the points and differences that we have as a community, thinking about the trends, where we're on the positive side of the trends, let's say, with the climate, urbanization of our area, and this notion of the 15-minute city, the accessibility we have in Northern Kentucky, I think is, and we think is a real opportunity. We took a look around the room. Is this the most diverse room that we can imagine? I don't think it is. Thinking about where the population is going, how do we dramatically increase inclusivity in Northern Kentucky in some very significant way, bring in younger, newer voices, the next generation of leaders for Northern Kentucky. And the last point is deploying a broad-scale change management process. I mean, a lot of great conversation here, a lot of vision here. The action. How do we show action? It's, from awareness down to inspiring action and change. Anything else, guys?
This should only take 40 minutes to
wrap up. Table 11 was as transient as Northern Kentucky is, so we've got a whole mix of feedback here. The first thing we talked about was keeping in perspective, and this is kind of counter to a futurist discussion, where we've come from and where we are today. And then looking forward, so that kind of framed a lot of our discussions. But our first big audacious move was kind of in response, it started out as in response to poor health metrics, but then we realized really quickly it was also an answer to talent retention and attraction. And that is adding 100 miles of recreational trails to Northern Kentucky. Paved, biking, walking, horseback, just really embracing the outdoor recreation needs in our region. The other was the poor education trends, and some of that we saw with the state report that came out, I think it was last week. And it's a big, audacious move, but the dissolution of chronically underperforming districts, and the reallocation of resources to better serve those students. And we went down rabbit holes of how to reinvent the discussion around early childhood education to prevent those districts from ever becoming in that place in the first place. So we really focused in on those as we had like I said, transient group and focused on those two.
Okay, so with that, Chris will be compiling all of this table information, and we'll report back out to the group in terms of priorities, action items, etc. Want to thank this group today. I think we've had a very engaged audience. I also want to recognize Hillary Wolfeck and Allie Price, who really helped put this together. Allie is an XU intern and did incredible things with our videos and work, and Hillary was all over this logistically with everything we did. Also need to shout out, Ignite Institute is incredible. I mean, not just from a curriculum standpoint, but the folks here were so receptive, so helpful. Jerry Gels, who's the principal, we were texting back and forth on parking logistics while he's got a full house of kids here. So really appreciated them as well. Hopefully you feel data informed. Chris, we thank you for a very informative, to me, entertaining and provocative day. And we fully intend to take this and put this into implementation status where it makes sense. So have a great night, and we hope to see you very soon. Thank you.